Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. Today we're speaking with Jeremy Jones about his exhibition, Your Heart is Bigger Than a Giant's Head, on view now through July 27th, 2024. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. It's a pleasure. You've written in your artist statement that your work, this body in particular, investigates the various spaces of parenthood and is meant to enshrine those, did you say quiet moments of childhood?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that means to you?
Sure. So as a parent and an artist, working with this body of work that highlights like some of the poignant times in my kid's life is
Sure.
important to me. Maybe some of the times aren't even poignant. They're just like everyday moments.
Yeah.
And often those are forgotten. They go by the wayside. You know, I can take pictures and stuff like that and try to keep it in my memory, but I'm a really kinesthetic person, kind of like a haptic learner, so I have to kind of like fumble around to...
And touch is important.
Yeah. Touch is super important. So yeah, you know, in addition to taking the photos and stuff like everybody else, I'm making sculptures, and I can go back I can go look at these sculptures later in time and kind of get a sense of what was happening during that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And for you, they become, and no pun really intended, but touchstones for a particular moment or happening. What do you hope that an outside objective viewer, their experience of the work, do you have them in mind at all? Or
Sure. That's a really good question. And often I don't have the audience in mind so much. However, when I've had these shows up before, I've encountered parents, and right away they can relate to it. Just the kind of chaos and the color. You know, it takes one to know one, so
yeah.
Once you're a parent, all the cliches and stuff are true.
Do you think one needs to have that experience of parenthood to experience these to their fullest, or can one get a sense of parenthood through their experience of the work?
Yeah, I think what you said about the former, I think, my hope is that people can get a sense of my experiences and sort of relate it to their own.
Sure.
You know, we've all been children before. And I use, like for instance, I'll use photos in my work sometimes. So like that really hones it in and it's specific, maybe to me. But then like the sculptural forms are kind of ominous, and like for me, they may start with like a very specific moment, and then sculpture takes a while to construct. So over time, those moments and those ideas are sort of changing throughout the process. We all live in a world of objects, and these ones are a little bit strange sometimes. I think they're engaging in that sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
I very much agree, and you bring up the word ominous. I'm glad that you broached that so I didn't have to, cold,
Yeah.
but there is a darkness around the edges. On the
Sure.
face of it, I think if glancing through the window of the door, it's rather whimsical, light.
Yeah.
But then when you get closer, there's a darkness around the edges.
Sure.
One that I really appreciate, in that a lot of the content that I absorbed as a child had those same elements to them. I mean, even Grimm's fairy tales, right? Or Edward Gorey or Terry Gilliam. They have that kind of balance of light and dark that I think really activates the work. Are you ever concerned about the amount of that ominous quality or darkness, and where does it come from? I mean, what are some of your inspirations for that?
Sure, good questions. So since a child, I've always been interested like in Halloween, you know, like dressing up sometimes in gory costumes like Jason and Freddy, and I would make my own costumes. Although when I was a kid, we were never allowed to see those shows, but somehow through the culture, you know, it just, for whatever reason.
Was there a sense of enhanced interest in that aesthetic through the prohibition of engaging and watching that content, do you think?
I would think so. Like, you know, what you're not allowed to see, maybe will, you know, kids, if we're not supposed to do something, they're gonna kind of swing the other way sometimes.
Sure.
But beyond that, I think, I don't know, I think there's light with dark, you know, like you can't have one without the other. My work before this was really about death and afterlife in graduate school. And then we found out we were gonna have a child. This is about 11 years ago, so I started making work about that. You know, all those mixed feelings, like it's just, it's, you know, you anticipate like a life-changing event, and so it's a mix of emotions, like, you know, good and bad and what ifs and stuff. And that's really where it all started, I think.
The terror of what if we screw our kids up.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and it's never ending.
I'm still working on that myself.
Yeah.
And as far as the work prior to your parenthood, you mentioned the content of it. What did it look like?
That's a good question. So the work before this body of work, about a little over 10 years ago in graduate school, my wife would help me cast my own body in different shapes. So it was all about, well, I'll backtrack. The shapes, they were like really loose castings, so I was covered in plaster, and then I would fiberglass on top. And then sometimes I'd cut, so they were basically shells, and I would cut through and then have like a series of like cages or like kind of like ethereal forms coming out. So it was really about like just the unknowingness of like life right now, and then like what's really beyond like the threshold. And so to like circle back to this work, you know, this work to me is more about life than death, of course. But they're always kind of like, you know, they're always tiptoeing around each other, the what ifs.
Is all of your work about this content currently, or do you have any other series that you work on concurrently that respond to other themes?
Sure. Yeah, I do work on other bodies of work. Let me think. Recently, I made a body of work similar to the one I just described with the full body castings, but I was using slab work, and I was constructing like a lot of faces, kind of like ebbing in and out of the slabs. And then I constructed like cages and lattices and kind of scaffoldings throughout the pieces.
And the slab work is, to be clear for folks that don't know, clay, hand-built clay process?
Yes, yeah. So I take a chunk of clay and I roll it out flat, and then I pick it up and I kind of manhandle it into like a cylindrical form. And then I would just start kind of using my hands, like very limited tools, and sort of making these morphed faces. The whole idea was to like make them very quickly, as opposed to this work, which is sometimes can take months and years to create. So just to think about ideas other than these, and just get some work made.
You're working different muscles, I mean, literally maybe, and as well as cognitively, and a bit of a palate cleanser, so to speak. Is that fair?
That's a great way to describe it, yeah.
Do you find that after doing some of that work, you can come back to this with fresh eyes? And have they influenced each other as far as something that you did with the slab work, maybe inspired work in this mode?
Yeah, that's the idea of a palate cleanser. That's a great way to describe it. Yeah, and I can't like think of it like off the top of my head, but it's just like, I hope to continue with this body of work and just until I'm just maybe burnt out, or maybe until the kids are 18, I don't know. Right. But
it's supposed to stop right there, 18.
I know.
Yeah, I haven't found that to be so true, but yeah. But right now you're still digging it.
I'm still digging it, yeah.
And finding new things.
I am.
Some of these works incorporate, you collaborated with both of your children.
Sure.
Do you find that through that process, or simply working independently, considering these moments, that it enhances or amplifies your closeness with the kids, or do you think it's on par with most families?
I definitely feel more connected if we're able to like work in the studio together, or like if we're kind of like as getting started on like a collaboration. Yeah. This piece right behind you called Trampoline Monster was actually, I'll just kind of break down like what we did, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
Sure. So like we got a trampoline right during the pandemic, and I had one as a kid, and so they're just great fun, right? And so 4 years later, the thing's wearing out, like the springs are popping off. It's kind of starting to dilapidate and get dangerous. So I had an idea to paint it. And so we kind of set up a camera, and I got a bunch of paint, and we just went to town painting it, just going wild. And that experience was like just shy of 45 minutes, but it felt like 5 minutes. Time just slipped away. So like the trampoline to me is like this portal. It's like this. You get inside, you're on uneven ground, like you're forced to kind of be confronted with it and just
respond.
Respond. And I always get super silly, and just maybe I'll turn into a trampoline monster, or an alligator, or Ring Around the Rosie, hence the little doll heads on there, or Dead Man is one of the games they were playing the other day. So.
The face, which is multiple faces, kind of Janus-like, or that in particular is a little bit frightening. I mean, it's a monster.
It's a monster,
right? Yeah. But it certainly rides that line between, and I use this in the best possible sense, but being, a bit goofy and but also a little bit frightening. And that's your intention.
That's my intention. Yeah. A little quirky, a little silly, but also, it's a creepy clown face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Process-wise, and you described this, but even before that, do you come up with an idea and do you draw it out? What type of preparatory work do you do? Or is it mostly working directly in the materials and responding to them?
Sure, that's a great question. And I've been thinking about it, and I'm pretty non-linear. However, one thing I've kept my whole adult life, maybe even into part of high school, are sketchbooks. So I always have a sketchbook. Sometimes I'll just draw in there for the sake of drawing. Sometimes I will get an idea for trampoline monster and make a sketch, and then get to work, and then kind of sketch and work and sketch and work. Sometimes I'll work directly in the material. Sometimes it'll be based off of something that somebody says. Like the title for this show, I really racked my brain for. And I was putting my daughter to bed one night, and we were saying our I love yous and stuff, and she's like, your heart is bigger than a giant's head. And I was like, where did you come up with that? And I've got a lot of giant heads in my work.
Yeah.
I love my kids, so
Yeah.
so things like that. So I always try to be open to ideas, So like the studio, I have a formal studio, but it's also in and out, The old saying, does art mimic life, or does life mimic art?
Sure.
I just try to keep a flow of creativity.
Yeah, yeah.
A flow happening.
So it sounds like essentially a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Yep.
When you collaborate with the kids, is there ever disagreements over direction, aesthetics? Dad, I have to have this unaltered. How flexible
Sure.
are you? I mean, I can't really imagine collaborating with anyone.
Yeah.
But so how does that work, and how does it look? Or is it essentially they do what you ask them to do?
Right, I just have a little factory.
Yeah. Right. You're going to sit there for 12 hours until I get the Batman that I want. Yeah.
So I think the idea of collaboration is kind of loose.
Sure.
I try not to even put seeds in their head that, this will be in an art show. I started talking about this toward the end, but they're little and I want to make it fun. So the idea of collaborating to paint the trampoline mat, that was just fun. And then
Sure.
that was last September, and the piece was finished the night before this show. So it took that long.
Yeah.
But also, let's see, this piece right here, the scooter kid. So my son, it's cast off my son's body. And so obviously that takes collaboration, but we did it slowly, started with the legs, and maybe the next weekend did the arms. And he was into the process for the most part, so I don't want to make it a chore or something they hate.
Sure.
This piece right here with the training wheels on the head, it's originally a plaster and ceramics, and it would just seem like a great surface to paint on. And my daughter's always drawing, mostly just drawing with marker and painting. And so I said, hey, do you want to paint this? And it probably took 20 minutes or so. And I did say, in order to keep things from not getting too muddy, I'm all right, let's just stop here. But that's kind of the most the most orders that I ever get.
Sure.
Yeah.
You grew up in Wyoming, yeah, Casper.
Yeah.
How do you feel that experience growing up there? Do we see that in this work? Does your experience living your childhood in that particular location influence your work as a whole?
Sure, I think it definitely does. When I grew up in Casper, the arts there, from my perception, they always seemed like had to be Western art or landscapes, something with someone once said, hooves and horns. Like if it didn't have hooves and horns, it's not art.
Sure. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
No,
You know. So I think my brother and I always rebelled against that. So we.
He's an artist as well.
He's an artist as well, and so we grew up rollerblading. In contrast to like the group of people that were skateboarding, we always kind of just did stuff on the outskirts.
Contrarian?
Maybe a little bit, yeah. And that idea of rollerblading, especially, so Casper is very isolated. It's like the second biggest town in Wyoming. There's not much to do, especially for kids. The weather is super brutal. It's just like Minnesota, except wind. Wind is what's kept the population from growing, I'm assuming. And so like circling back to rollerblading, it's like we did that for maybe 8 to 10 years, and that was like life. Like, you know, that's all there was. So you're looking at the environment, bleak as it may be, and like, oh, you know, like a handrail looks cool to slide down, or this spot at the downtown with a picnic bench or something's like really cool to jump up and slide on. So I think we were kind of appropriating space and making it fun for us, and just looking at the world a lot differently from those activities.
And it stuck with you?
Yes, yeah. In fact, I do have a piece back here called the Ephemeral Grind. It's a self-portrait of me in the yellow helmet. And the bottom skate was cast in 2004. And then the top clay piece is like current day. And it's, the idea is just, well, to think about last summer, my son and I got into going to skate parks a lot. And it was like an everyday thing for months and months. And at one point I got to thinking it was just like an epiphany that, whoa, I'm like skating with my kid. He's having a blast, I'm having a blast. And it's like, whoa, I would have never thought that as my teenage self, or, you know, early 20-something. So I really felt like I was like in my younger, youthful body. And like if we're talking about materiality, the wooden part, I found, you know, I searched and searched for months, like how am I going to make the body? And so I found this wooden piece at the local park, Hanson Park in New Brighton.
Was it always meant, did you always envision it to be that form? You never considered casting your own body? And,
no.
It was, you had that in mind?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I didn't want it to be, there are some like literal elements to it, like, you know, a recognizable face and recognizable components, but it's such a weird activity that most people aren't very familiar with, like this niche subculture. So I had to make it look strange, you know, like hashtag weird blade dad. So that's the reason for like this, and just the title, like the Ephemeral Grind. It's like grind has a couple parts. Like a grind on rollerblades is when you jump up on something and slide from like point A to point B. There's kind of like this interstitial space that happens, this dopamine rush, but also the ephemeral grind, like life. You know, life's a grind, but it passes so quickly. Yeah. And
you're clearly hardworking. There's the grind of creating art.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
How much do you, I mean, and for most of us, that aspect is quite pleasurable. Yeah. But the other aspects, maybe less so, and more the grind, like applying for shows and promoting your work and trying to get into galleries. Do you emphasize the making aspect, or do you know, the old rule of thumb is 50% making, 50% marketing. Do you follow that proportion?
No.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get better about that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I haven't updated my website with a good update in probably 6 or 7 years. And then, you know, sometimes I'll, like now that I've finished a body of work like this, I'll be editing photos and, you know, applying for stuff. But after a while, it's just not in my nature, and I get back to the work. And if opportunities come up, then I try to apply for them or seek them out. But it's always, you know, they're both very different.
Yeah.
Those two modalities.
For sure.
But
grindy.
Grindy, yeah, for sure. And it, you know, it kind of never ends. It's like I was on the upswing, like for this show, finishing work, and then you know, the show happens, and then it's like, not downward, but it's like, you know, what's the next thing? Yeah, it's just,
there's always a little post-show blues,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, a little bit.
Do you have something that you're working towards? What is next, or are you still working that out?
I am still loosely working it out. However, yeah, that's a good point. I try to keep stuff that has not been finished. So I've got a bunch of like bisque, like from wheel throwing stuff. It's just kind of, it'll probably never be in a show, but just so I can, like, you know, start putting, work makes work. So if I just start working, pretty soon I'll forget about, like, I'll just start making work and I'll forget about where I was, you know. Yeah. I do have a couple ideas for bigger pieces that are kind of tangential to this. My grandmother recently passed in January, and she was a very special person in my life. And last summer, I was able to get some like castings of her hands and feet. I also like brought some porcelain one time and had her just squish it into these like ball forms. So she was a healer. She was a foot reflexologist and really holistic and very positive. And so I've got these pieces and parts. You know, I even have like her glass eye now and like a heart valve on top of like hundreds of voicemails that are like really beautiful. They just, they're almost like oral letters or something. So I have plans to do something with that stuff. I don't exactly know what I've drawn it out and things like that. But,
sure.
And you know, that could segue into like a whole new body of work.
Yeah.
So.
It's exciting to be on the cusp of that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is for sure.
Material-wise, right? You've got just a multitude of different mediums, oftentimes working together in concert in singular pieces. What has inspired your material use? And I imagine it also requires some significant problem solving and connection schemes between dissimilar materials. Can you speak about material choice and your experiences?
Sure. Well, I use like all the basic sculptural materials. I feel like clay, metal, wood, plaster, found objects, Bondo. If I think about my childhood, my dad does auto body. And sometimes we would hang around the auto shop and see cars like with the surfaces all sanded down and Bondo being added onto it. And then eventually, you know, they'd come out of the shop like brand new cars. Yeah. So like really transformed, like, you know, a classic, like old school body work. So sometimes I'll think about like why do I make all these choices? Also, it's just kind of out of boredom. You know, I can get bored of something, or kind of like if I get burnt out on a material, I can switch to something else for a while.
Sure.
And then to even like think about all the materials I use, I kind of think, someone once said that there's like a relation between materials. So clay is like one of my staple mediums. So I kind of think about clay in relation to wood. So it's like I can use clay, I can model it. I can kind of do that with wood, I can carve it, and think about my skills in clay. The same thing with like metal and found objects. So like, yeah, it's just what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Freely grab at what is calling out to you, we'll say,
for sure.
which is a bit of a cliche, but that is the truth.
That's the truth, yeah.
Cool. Let's open it up to questions. Yeah.
Jeremy, it's so nice to meet you. I came for another opening, and I came in here, and I went, wow. I was just, I couldn't wait to come back and hear about you. So I am absolutely enthralled with it's scary, but I'll go on this ride with you.
Sure.
So I just would love if you could just pull the pieces together. It's on wheels. It's got, some fun pieces there. And then we've got the skeleton with the blood.
Yeah.
So just in your eyes, what is this all?
Sure. This piece is kind of like a concoction of different times and memories, but one of the core memories about this piece, it's just about my son. Like we go to an amusement park like Valley Fair or Como Zoo once a year, and he gets me to go on these scary rides, and it's not normally something I would do, but I feel like it's important to. I'm like, I'll take one for the team, and I'll jump on this roller coaster with you, I guess. Sometimes it feels like your eyes are bleeding. It's just. So that's why, there's sort of this abstraction to it. The faces, there's not like a whole body. All the faces on here are combined and kind of getting whirled into each other or swallowed into each other. And then I just thought about these mechanical components, which went through different iterations. I thought about at one point having stuffed animals coming out of here, but then the space was kind of tight, so I decided on adding these dowels on here and just thinking about them as like, like the rides that have the swings, and there's all like, so when you're at a distance, you see just like little balls of people. They also have this sense if you get too close, it's gonna maybe bop you or something.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just have to say you have the most supportive family. It's fabulous.
I do.
Keep on going.
Thank you.
Awesome. Down here, if you could pass it.
Hello there. I'm very curious about the green mask with the yellow lines and the horns.
Sure. That one is called Stretch Batman Mask with Lego Teeth. And my son was into Batman. Like when I made this piece in like 2020, like really into Batman. So I was making like all kinds of like superhero or Batman themed pieces and superhero themed pieces, and I never want to be like super literal, so I just thought about, what if Batman's stretched? And there's a kind of this. People have said it has like kind of like an Egyptian look to it, which wasn't really intentional, but I've always been fascinated with like Egyptian art, and so maybe that was subconscious. But I added Lego teeth in there to give it like an approachable sensibility to it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, I was wondering, I have a couple questions. If like body horror entertainment from like movies or books has any influence on your work, and also if your work influences how you see those things.
Sure. So like horror movies or
Yeah,
something like that?
yep.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't watch a ton of horror movies. I have in the past, but with everything going on in the world, it just seems like too much sometimes. However, this piece right here, Trampoline Monster, I saw Killer Clowns from Outer Space maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and that definitely had an effect. Just like I'm like, how have I never seen this movie before? It's so like the clowns in there, have this like kind of campy, dark, handmade quality, and that just resonated with me. So I ended up like making like my own version of one of those clowns and wearing it at Halloween because I like to make Halloween costumes still. So I guess that piece would directly resonate with the question, hopefully, but yeah.
Another question that came to mind, you were talking about your grandmother's glass eye that you have now. Do you have any other objects in your collection that are important to you or something special in your collection?
Yeah, that's a great question. Found objects. It's like my goal with found objects is to like take something that is essentially trash, and give it a status where somebody's going to pay attention to it. One piece I do not have in this show, but one piece I feel like really emphasizes that is a piece I made called Minnie Went Up to Kevin, and our family dog passed away about 7 years ago, and so it sounds a little morbid, but I cast her post-mortem after she had passed, and this is right at that same night. So I cast her in plaster. It's a very fragile material, so I ended up making like a sarcophagus, kind of in a cartoony shape of my dog that holds the plaster casting of my dog Minnie. And anybody that has a dog can usually relate to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
While the mic's being passed, related to the found object thing, when you identify a found object as being something that has some sculptural interest or has maybe a future home in a piece of yours, does it take a while for that to emerge, or do you feel a sense of real responsibility to it, so it's got to be just the right thing, or do you just tear after it and kind of find out what it says to you?
That's a really good question. Sometimes both. Sometimes I'm not afraid to like cut into a piece and just use parts of it. If it has like real sentimental value or something, I'll try to preserve the integrity. But to even know if I want to use it, sometimes it just has to hang out in the studio for a while.
Yeah.
And I'm really influenced by stuff in my environment. So if it hangs out, I can, however that happens subconsciously or through drawings and stuff, it'll eventually end up in a piece. So I just have boxes of found objects, some that are like bits and pieces of like toys from my kids. I'll go for walks and find stuff, just weird stuff like shopping lists or, just anything you can think of. And I have a box that's like dedicated to like walking found objects, kids, grandparents, stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing work.
Thank you.
Your brain scares me, but in a good way.
Yeah. Me too sometimes.
So when I look at this, it seems to me that you've done a lot of portraiture. Do you think of it that way? I mean, you've identified the one of yourself, self-portrait.
Sure. Sometimes I do call them portraits. and obviously not in the traditional sense of like
Sure.
somebody sitting for a portrait. I'm not super concerned with like expression sometimes. Like a lot of the faces are, the eyes are closed or they seem like asleep or like in an internal state. So I add to the portrait with like props or extra elements to give it some life.
Yeah, the closed eyes to me give it kind of a dreamlike quality.
Yeah, I like
That's interesting.
Yeah, the idea of like an inner state, because it's like, what expression do you give something like, and then once it's like maybe it's smiling, like what is that? Is it just smiling for the sake of smiling? So I like the internal dialogue that the sculptures seem to have, some of them, and I also like the idea of like a sculpture that's quiet also may confront the viewer about their own internal state. Just like, when there's quiet in a room, you start to think like, why is it so quiet in here? So, yeah.
If I'm hearing you right, all of these pieces probably evolve from a fairly specific story or experience.
Sure.
Something that happened, whether it's with your kids or you or whatever. Is it important for you that we as viewers get that? I mean, do you feel better if I'm looking at something and thinking trampoline or whatever?
Sure.
Does that matter?
It doesn't matter so much. If I'm trying to direct the viewer, like in some way, I'll try to do it like in the titling, like, trampoline monster or the scooter kid. And I guess, yeah, like having control of the viewer like that is, or controlling, interpretations, I guess is kind of tricky. Yeah, I feel like for me personally, it's a way to kind of show my world to people to almost let them interpret it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as these pieces are evolving from that story, you're making aesthetic decisions. You're deciding to make that orange and to, change the shape of that tall post, whatever. Do those decisions ever get in the way of the story? Is there ever a conflict there so that, gee, I'd really like to have a big blue chunk here, but that makes no sense with this story?
Sure.
And if that happens, who wins?
Yeah, that's a great question, like aesthetics kind of versus like truth to like what you're trying to get at. I feel like, I don't know, I try to stay open like with my work. So like if I'm gonna add another material like formally that wasn't in the cards originally, but if it's just gonna work better, I'm probably gonna add it. And for me, I'm really dictated by process. I do not like to know what something's gonna turn out like. I get really excited about like just the action of making work, and the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. I am okay with editing stuff too, like trying a bunch of stuff and then editing out. But does that answer your question? Yeah. A little bit.
Has it ever become too nightmarish and someone said, you got to dial it back?
Not to my face.
Does your family serve as a check at all? Do they ever respond in a way that's maybe less favorable, and do you go back and change it? Or relative to maybe, and I'm saying this, not you, but the contrarian aspects of your brother and your activities as a teen, Well, I'm going to double down. They don't like this. We're going to get 3
Sure.
times more of it.
Sure, sure.
How does that work, if at all? Do you have any of that?
I do yeah, I love feedback. And I guess I think about it like an ocean wave, like on the beach. Like you're gonna get all this feedback coming in, stuff washing ashore from different people, and you can kind of pick some of those pieces and stew in them, or not stew, but ruminate, think about them. Sometimes they get tossed back out in the water, but some of those are kept. Yeah, I guess my hope is that people will think about the piece a little more than just, oh, that's creepy or weird. And again, that's hard to control, but.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think maybe because it's an assertive quality, like even during this discussion, it becomes something that maybe we dwell on, but the vast majority of the imagery, I would say, is light. It's just that the other attract, it's clickbait, I guess.
Clickbait.
Essentially,
Yeah.
right? Hashtag gore, right? Yeah, I was curious about that as far as, where is that boundary? So, yeah.
Yeah. I think the boundary really lies within myself, like if I just feel comfortable putting it out there or not.
Sure.
A good way for me to test that, I guess, for like the last 4 or 5 years, we've been making like Halloween installations. And, my neighborhood's like a mix of like young families and like people that have lived there, like homesteaded it. So you can imagine that that's kind of a good place to test because it's like Halloween, so can kind of push the boundaries a little bit. And so far, I've never had anyone come to the door and complain. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
A couple questions. First one is, how do you know when you're done? And where do you store all this? How do you manage your inventory?
Those are great questions. Yeah, finishing a piece is definitely tricky and complicated for me. It helps to have deadlines, so you just, and like in the case of this show, like working on the fly, using a lot of intuition. I often just rely on aesthetics. Does it feel done? Like, is it missing something? What else could I do? Not being trying to be open to like, if I need to do an alteration, like just do it. Storage. Yeah, that is tricky, and I'm still working on that. Most of my work.
You don't have to have an answer to that question. It's just, I'm always curious.
Yeah.
This is a lot of stuff.
It's all over my house, like in the rafters, in the utility closet, in the laundry room, in the studio, in the shed.
Hopefully on display too, though. Do you display some of your work besides just storage?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But I guess the issue with that, I just get sick of it, like, because there's so much of it. Like, it's like, yeah, maybe that's something I should do, is like maybe have like a rotating pedestal with a piece or something. But yeah, mostly it just gets stored, and trying to figure out better ways to like access pieces, because I'm at the point now where there's lots of pieces, and I'll like put it in a certain box, and I'll need to pull it for a show, and I'm like, where the heck is that piece?
You don't have RFID tags?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Scan codes.
Yeah. I've thought about that, like even taking photos and putting it on the side of a box or something, just in my own weird organizational way.
For sure.
So when I walked in, I was just like, wow, whoa. And for my first reaction was music. It just felt very musical to me.
Okay.
And I sort of expected things to move, and I was waiting for these doll heads to start to you know, float up.
Yeah, like that kind of, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, when I started walking in, I was like, I don't know, because I was waiting for like the head to turn and follow me a little bit.
Nice.
And so I feel like when we walk out of here, there's going to be like all this humming and conversation going on between the pieces. There's a lot of energy in
Sure.
here between the pieces. And I wondered if, 2 questions. One, I see a lot of these pieces in like musical videos and animated in some way where they are moving or interacting. So do you listen to music, or is this something that's ever kind of floated through while you were working on a piece?
Yeah, I do like to listen to music sometimes when I work, but I've never thought of it like how you did. That's great. You know, sometimes I'll make like a reel for Instagram or something and add music to it. I recently, like, you know, some of these pieces with wheels are mobile, so I was like taking pictures to document, and then I'm like, well, I'm just gonna push these along and just see what happens. Yeah, and as far as like music, I love music. But I like know nothing about music. But I do definitely respond to like the emotional qualities of music, even more so than other art forms. So, yeah.
Yeah, it feels very musical in here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
and
a
I'm
carnival
not a
or
musician
something.
either, so, yeah, cool.
Cool. Tim Burton movie. Yeah.
Do you work every day? Like, what kind of a schedule do you maintain? I understand winding up when you have a show coming.
Sure.
They're nice deadlines, but even when that isn't the case,
Yeah.
do you have a regular work routine? And it sounds as though you've got several pieces going at once. You're not starting a piece and finishing it and starting another and finishing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I will start 10 pieces, and it'll take a while to finish. My routine, you know, with having a busy life, full-time job and like a part-time job and kids and a family and, you know, just like everybody else, I guess. But I do try to prioritize my art, and like on just a normal schedule. Yeah, it can be random, but I'll try to work every day. So like after the kids go to bed is like a good time. I can get a chunk of time. And that, you know, that may be like just sketching or something, or even doing some like organization in the studio, because that's really important to me, is just like having a space that I can actually work in. But yeah, it's really, I don't like come in at like 6 o'clock or something and clock in and clock out at 10. It's just whenever I can find the time, but it's almost every day. Yeah, whenever I can just fit it in. So.
The significance of the horns, the unicorns,
Yeah.
any significance there? Is it like magical or?
Yeah, you know, I call my daughter Magical Margot sometimes, but it's just, it kind of relates to her interest of like, at this moment, of like rainbows and unicorns and, you know, cartoons and that kind of thing. So that's the reference.
This guy's got a
Hey.
question.
Jeremy, you emphasized in your statement parenting and the influence of your children, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about their ages and the collaboration? Like, do you have a shared experience? You express a couple of those.
Sure.
And then develop the piece, or do they actually interact as you're creating the piece? Now, obviously, this is very mature professional work, so they probably aren't molding the clay with you.
Right.
But
right.
what is the collaboration that you talked about?
So both things you said are true. Like some of it's like direct collaboration. It's like, for instance, when my daughter was like, she was in diapers, so probably 18 months till current day. She's always drawing. And so sometimes I'll be, lightly working on something in the studio, at least at that point. And she was drawing, and I'm kind of feeding her the drawings. And so at some point, she amassed a large amount of drawings. I mean, a big stack. And I was working on Zoom calls and cutting these out, like these scribbles essentially. And then the idea was to take those drawings and layer them in resin. And so after I'd cut those pieces out, we sat down on the couch and she kind of helped me place those pieces in a frame that I could pour resin in. And I titled that piece See the Monkeys, which is pretty ambiguous, but she would say, I want to see the monkeys, which actually entailed seeing some other sculptures in the storage, not these ones, but I guess it doesn't matter, but see the monkey. So it was the act of going down to paint became the title of that collaboration.
How old are the kids? How many are there?
There's 2, and they're 5 and 10.
Right now?
Right now, yep. And I've been working on this body of work for 10 years. None of this work in here is 10 years old, but it's just the newest iteration. And I was working, I might have already said this, but I was, before my son was even born, I was making pieces to kind of conceptualize kids.
A boy and a girl?
A boy and a girl, yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
So when you're working on something and you're working on more than one piece at a time usually, but when you're getting toward the end on a piece and you realize it's just not happening, do you put it aside for parts and bits and pieces, or do you literally just trash it?
Yeah, I don't trash that many pieces. I'll just try to bulldoze through it usually. But yeah, maybe taking a break, that can be very wise. Getting some sleep, Even sometimes I open up the kiln and I pull out a piece and I'm like, ugh, it's not what I expected. And I try to tell that to the people I work with too, give yourself a break from what you're working on and then look at it with fresh eyes. But not to say that I'm not willing to, cut something apart to make it better, make edits. Yeah. Even pieces that have broken in the past, like ceramic pieces, I've found ways to cobble them back together. I feel like I'm pretty industrious. The optimal situation is to pull something out of the kiln and have it perfect. It's rarely ever the case. Everything is not perfect, and everything, in my case, usually takes longer than I anticipate to create. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your work with our community.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've been speaking with Jeremy Jones about his exhibition, Your Heart is Bigger Than a Giant's Head, on view now through July 27th, 2024.